Books aren't just made of words, you know. They're also filled with places to visit and people to meet. Welcome to Books on Air, the podcast you don't want to miss. You're about to get a sneak peek at what goes on behind the scenes with authors. You're going to find out their secret recipe for creating a book. They'll also tell you where they get their ideas, and you will get the inside scoop on their next project. Want to know more? Terrific. We'll tell you where you can find them on social media. Are you ready? Okay, let's meet today's author. Now, I have to say that I am so pleased to introduce today's author. She's back. Her name is Clare Cinnamon, and we're here to talk about her newest novel, Return, a Halloween time travel romance. Now, this is the first book in her new holiday-related time travel romance series. Clare Cinnamon is one of my favorite people. And she's pretty amazing. She has 2 degrees. She has one in business and a second in psychology. She's also the author of the Laney Cash trilogy. She began writing romances before she even read one. She's a voracious reader and a compulsive writer who feels that reading takes away from writing. And I read a quote where she said, "A writer reads one good or bad line and says, 'Oh my gosh, give me a pen.'" It's so good to have you back again, Clare. Thanks for joining me.
I'm so glad to be here, Suzanne, again.
You know, I'm reading through the book, and I believe that I saw a quote from you in an interview where you said that you didn't care for science fiction or fantasy, and yet this new book, Return, is both fiction, fantasy, science fiction, fantasy, plus romance. How in the world did this happen?
I'm so glad you asked that right in the beginning, because it's a great story. I have a natural pen for romance, suspense, and characters that are relatable to modern times. That's what I've done for 20 years. But with Return, it was last Halloween, which is my favorite day of the year, and I was getting dressed. My husband and I were getting dressed in costume. And I said to him, I'm so ready to write something outside the box that really pushes me. And he so calmly said, why not write about Halloween? And I could hardly make myself go to the costume party because the entire time travel, fantasy, push myself kind of storyline just started filtering in, and all of a sudden it was so obvious.
I love it. And you say, I read a place where you said you wrote in a frenzied manner, day and night for a month to get Return out.
Told you, yes. Right. I've told you before, I'm a pantser anyway. And so, it just took so little because Halloween and just that whole costume kind of thing, the full moon, all of that has just always been a big deal to me in October, autumn. So once it started coming in, I started on November 1st, and I finished around, I think, November 30th, but I had to write pretty much night and day.
I bet you just couldn't stop, could you?
I couldn't.
Now, your sister, she got involved, and I think this is really interesting. She did the cover. How did this happen that she did the cover art? And it's a painting. It's a huge painting.
Yes, right. So, last time we talked, she was toying with another book that came out over the summer, Sunshine and Lev. That was the first she illustrated for me. She's been drawing and painting as long as I've been writing, and we have that appreciation for each other, but we never collaborated until something sort of sparked for her, and she felt like something I wrote was so related to something she painted. And when we started comparing, there's like a painting that goes with a book of mine for the past 25 years. We've just lined them up over and over and over again. So with Return, I just gave her, a few sentences, and she said, just let me have it. I'll see what I can do. And she surprised me with this beautiful, huge painting that we did make the cover out of. So I am just over the moon, literally and figuratively, about that collaboration.
Well, the other thing that I thought was so cool, I looked at your blog, and you had a Halloween party, and you had pictures with people, and they're on your blog, in front of that big painting, and I looked at that and I just thought that that was so wonderful. And you said something that it was so wonderful when I read this. You said, "This has been a dream come true." Clare, you have been so successful. I just thought that was such a wonderful thing for you to say and a wonderful thing for you to feel.
Yes, well, I hope to inspire anybody that at this point writes or paints, that they would keep going and get comfortable enough to live their dreams. And I've had, like I said, a wonderful, adventurous life in general with so many good things, but to see the writing in print, to hold your own book is the ultimate for an author. There's just no doubt about that. I don't really care whether people read and like it as much as I do just, wow, there it is, I finished it and I'm okay with it floating around in society. And then to have my sister's painting on the front and to have a Halloween party in 2020 and to let people take their pictures in front of the cover that's this amazing painting, it just gets better and better.
I just loved it. I thought that that was so cool, and I hope that we'll tell our listeners where they can find your blog in a few minutes, but I hope they'll go and look at the pictures, because I just thought it just gives it a different dynamic. I guess that's what I'm really trying to say.
Yes, Suzanne, in 2020 with COVID, I started being published in late 2019, and I did get invited to the book fair in London and New York and lots of book signings. It was almost instant success and approval, but with COVID, all of that sort of shut down and still is nowhere near, for people's safety. There's a lot of things that I still am not willing to do. So I got very creative and said, what can I do to put it out there, to put Return out there? And it just crossed my mind. I always have this Halloween party, and this will be our photo backdrop this year, and that's a way for people to feel like they've kind of gotten sucked into Return and its release.
Well, one of the things that I think is really important about authors like you and others is that you're writing. And I am a reader. And nothing helps me escape something like this virus and all the turmoil and mishmash that's going on in society. Nothing helps me escape better than a good book. So let's give our listeners an overview of Return, because it is so creative and so clever. This is a clever book, Clare.
Yes, I am so excited about what came out of my, attempt at time travel. So Mawd and Ian Kelly are married in 2020 in Manhattan on Halloween night. They've been married for years. And suddenly he bounces back into time and finds out that Mawd is a Welsh time traveler in 1400 who was promised to marry an Englishman to help relations between Wales and England at the time. And so she went on Samhain, which is the Welsh Halloween, it's where Halloween started, and did a ritual to try to get herself removed from this arranged marriage at 15 years old. And her husband, Ian, from 2020, appears on the stream bank, but she, of course, doesn't know him yet because she's only 15 years old. So he has to make her fall in love with him through time to try to get himself back to his wife in 2020.
And they hop back and forth. This is the part that I thought was so creative and clever.
Oh, so much fun.
You have them time hop.
Yes.
Now, how did you choose? You have them time hop in an English plague village, a Colonial America, the Roaring Twenties, and the hippy-born Summer of Love in San Francisco.
Yes. So that was the most fun part. I love to travel. I like history. I love Halloween. So I was like, as I was writing it, I'm not going to keep them in one place. How boring. They have to get to Manhattan in 2020 somehow. So what if Mawd continues to hop forward due to this ritual that she's invited into her life, and it makes her land in other places with challenges where she has to decide if she wants to summon Ian again and move forward again. So then, after I decided that's what I wanted to do, I looked for places that had major events that fell around Halloween that she would feel challenged and need to, find Ian again. And it just took me straight into the Plague Village. And by the way, I wrote about the Plague Village before we actually entered COVID, and now I look back at that entire part, and it just feels so interesting. The energy there is so relatable right now. And then the colonial time, there was a massacre that occurred right around Halloween. And in the Roaring Twenties, the crash of the stock market and all, she's there right before the Roaring Twenties really go into the Great Depression. Summer of Love was the most fun, probably, Suzanne, because San Francisco threw a mock funeral in October after the Summer of Love because they were so overcrowded with homeless teenagers and drugs and different things that what started out fun became really a problem. So they ran this mock funeral through the city to signify that go home, it's over. And so I put Mawd and Ian there during that time, too.
I love it. So you've got a little magic mixed in with this as well.
Yes, definitely.
These are not things that you usually enjoy.
No. And I will be honest, I'm thrilled with the end result, and I'm already hearing back, and extra thrilled to hear back from reviewers on how much they love the time hops. It's a different spin on time travel. But now for me, because I'm a pantser and I write about modern society, I never have to go back and fact check myself, really, you know. And on this, although it's fiction and I'm okay with bending the time period a little bit, I'm also sort of an intellectual type, and I did not want to, you know, like write a electric lighting before we had it, or a car that could make it from one place to another before that was possible. So I did have to go back and fact check myself a lot, and it was so new for me.
Yeah, this is such a departure. I mean, you're not a romance writer that I would categorize as a classic romance writer. It's a different kind of spin on the whole idea of romance. And so normally what you write is fiction, and it's your world, so you can make it do, say, and be anything you want to. But if you bring that real world in, then you're right. You do have to make sure that things are exactly the way they need to be.
Right. So I am a pantser, but you'd have to say at times I had to be a plotter as well when I was writing Return. And I just welcome that at my age, and as much as I've written off the cuff over the years, it was so interesting to have to push myself and not just put it down and say, I could just be writing about somebody right now in 2020, you know, instead of trying to understand the Plague Village. And so it just really pushed my intellectualism in a new way, and I'm grateful for that.
Now, you've got to define pantser. You know that there are some of our listeners who might not have heard our first interview where we talked about being a pantser or a plotter.
Right. Well, you know, you've written some too. So most authors are mainly one or the other. A pantser, like fly by the seat of your pants, write all night because you wake up and the storyline is there. And that started for me when I was 4 years old. Before I could actually write on paper, I would be like, I've told you before, hey, write this down. So it's always impulsive, and it's so real to me that I can just put my fingers, the characters, I wake up and they have names most of the time. And then a plotter is more like they have an idea and they might write an outline and figure out how to plug this in, or what kind of character do I need to make this happen. So that's a plotter. But when you write time travel and you write about history, like I said, because I wanted there to be some level of authenticity to each era, I did have to plot it out. So that pushed me and pushed my ability to write and still stay in that energy that I love to be in.
See, I love it that you're stretching yourself and that you're pushing yourself in another direction, because I think you've been so successful in one direction, it would be so easy to just be, you know, to continue. But you have stretched into areas that you didn't even enjoy reading. And I think
that's correct.
Yes, I think that's even more daring and courageous.
You probably, I think you must have read the interview where I admitted that I threw Harry Potter across the room.
I did.
I did. I'm not critical. You know, that's not to criticize Harry Potter. That's a broad-based feeling for me. I have tried many times with my reader friends, hey, you have to read this. You know, you're a big reader, big writer. read this, write this. That entire genre for me just was not resonating. It never was. And so, yeah, I just said, what can I do with it, you know? And so I don't really have a lot of reading experience to base writing Return on. I just took it and did my own thing with it.
And I think that makes it a better book. So let's talk about, our listeners I know are going, okay, where can we find the book? Always, I check Amazon. And before we started talking, I had checked Amazon to make sure that everything's working. So what the listeners need to do is just put Amazon in their search feature, click on it, and when it comes up, at the top of the page is a big box. And in that big box, just put Return, a Halloween time travel romance by Clare, C-L-A-R-E, Cinnamon, C-I-N-N-A-M-O-N. Click on it, and the book will come right up, and they'll see that beautiful cover that your sister designed. And then there's also in the upper right-hand corner, there's an Open Here feature. If you'll click on those words, the book will, I'm using air quotes, open, so that you can see the first part of the book, and there's a nice excerpt there that they can get a feel for the writing and a feel for the book. Is there somewhere else that it's available, Claire, that you would like to tell the listeners about?
Yes. It's always on Barnes & Noble as well, both places.
Now, you also are on social media, and this is where they'll be able to see those pictures, and I actually lifted the quote at the very beginning from your blog. I saw that, and I thought, I'm taking this, I'm using this today, so that's where
it sounded familiar.
It's your quote. I took it right off the blog. So let's tell our listeners how they can find that.
So, yes, the blog is a WordPress blog, and it's from Clare Cinnamon on WordPress, and then Instagram is Clare Cinnamon Author, Facebook is Clare Cinnamon Author, Twitter is just Clare Cinnamon.
Now, are you going to do any kind of video or anything with this? It just screams for one.
Yes, I'm working on that now, and I think it's important to note, Suzanne, that when I say Halloween time travel, if somebody's not that big into Halloween, or that they say, well, Halloween's over until next year, Halloween, or Samhain, which is the ritual, is required for Mawd to meet Ian again, but she has to live it out each time in between the time hops. And so the majority of the book is her living through these time hops, not Halloween. So I'm working on a video now, and actually purposely wanted it to come out on Halloween instead of before Halloween, the book. So I am working on a video now and how I want to present that.
It's just, as I read through, I thought, this is so visual. It just really screams for a video. So I was hoping that when I asked you that question, that was the answer that I'd get.
Yes. And I do have, because I have heard from a lot of readers so far with Return, I do have a Pinterest board for Return. If anybody that's not as visual and wants to try to, visualize what some of those places look like in history or whatever, I pinned photos to my Clare Cinnamon Author Pinterest just to give you some little glances of what it must have felt like or looked like in each time period.
I'm sitting here with my thumb up. That's a great idea. That's a great idea, because you're right. Yeah. Some people they're not visual when they read, and they can't see the scene. And I think that that's a really great idea, to give them some sort of visual bookmark for themselves to be able to see what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Now, are you already planning to do, I mean, I know this is the first in the series, and you said that there will be 6 books. So are you already sort of planning what's coming?
Yes, and they are going to fall. They are holiday-based. Equinox is during Lent. Pendulum has to do with New Year's Eve, and I'm going to release one per year in the time travel series, because you may remember from our last interview, I've finished 20 novels over 25 years and just stopped publishing last year. So books that are more like the Lady Cash trilogy and more like Sunshine and Lev that came out this summer, the modern romance suspense is what my publisher calls me. I have every intention of going back and publishing all of those. So I've developed a calendar, and there'll be one time travel book per year mixed in with my traditional modern romance suspense.
Oh, wonderful. That's perfect. Now, I'd like for you to have the last word about your book.
Yeah.
You may remember last time. This is a very interesting book, very cleverly written. Your prose is wonderful. The whole idea of this book is just terrific. I don't mean to rave, but it just is terrific. When the reader closes either physically or electronically the back cover of that book for the last time, do you want them to just feel like they've been entertained and had a really great time and been able to escape? Or is there something else, Claire, that you want them to take with them?
Yes. Normally I always want it to be whatever you want it to be. I'm not attached to an outcome. I'm totally comfortable with different people thinking this may have happened behind the scenes or this person meant that. Normally, I'm so comfortable with that. But when I finished Return, I had a new feeling, and I'm sure it's because it was a new experience for me, that I hope people feel like they stepped back into those time periods. I even looked in the dictionary for words that felt like hippie words, words that felt like Roaring 20s words, words that felt patriotic for the colonial time period. And so I just hope that we get to live a little bit back in time and see what it felt like. And they were in love through all of those time periods. So the prevailing theme is love prevails.
And great love really prevails, like these two have. I love it.
Right.
I can't tell you how much fun it is for me to talk to you and to talk about books and to talk about how you do things. I mean, I just enjoy you so much as an author and as a person. Thank you so much for allowing me to be privileged to talk about Return with you today, Claire.
The feeling's completely mutual, and we will do it again.
Promise?
Promise.
All right, listeners, remember, you can find Return, a Halloween time travel romance by Claire Cinnamon, both on Amazon and Barnes & Noble. You've been listening to the Books on Air podcast, brought to you on webtalkradio.net. You can also hear this podcast on iTunes or iHeartRadio. I'm Suzanne Harris, and I surely hope that you will join our next Books on Air podcast, because remember, you never know who's going to be here. Thank you so very much for listening.